Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I still remember that morning as if it were yesterday. The sunlight was streaming softly through the curtains, painting the room in warm golden hues, but no amount of light could chase away the heaviness I felt. My heart was racing, my thoughts tangled, and a small part of me kept replaying every moment from the night before. How did a simple evening turn into something so unforgettable? Something that now lingers in my mind, refusing to let me breathe. It all started innocently enough. I thought it would be just another quiet night, a chance to relax, maybe catch up on some much-needed rest. But then, he was there, my stepson. That unexpected glance, the way he smiled, and the subtle tension in the air made my pulse quicken without me even realizing it. I kept telling myself, this is normal. Nothing more than a fleeting thought, yet my body and mind seemed to betray me in ways I couldn't control. I know this is delicate, and I want you to understand, this is a story about emotions, longing, and unexpected connections. It's about the confusing mix of attraction, hesitation, and the curiosity that sometimes makes us question the boundaries we thought were clear. The night brought whispers, quiet touches, and moments that were both innocent and charged with unspoken feelings. The kind of moments that leave a mark on your mind, long after the world wakes up and moves on. As I sit here, reflecting on everything, I can't help but wonder how much of our emotions are really under our control. Have you ever had a moment with someone that made your heart skip, even when logic screamed otherwise? I want you to think about that as we dive into this story. Could one night change everything? Could a single encounter plant seeds that grow into something neither of us expected? And here's the thing, nothing was simple. Nothing was straightforward. There was tension, unspoken questions, and glances that lingered too long. The kind of tension that makes you question what's right and what's impossible, the kind that keeps you awake and rewinds every memory over and over in your mind. I can't even describe it fully because the emotions were too raw, too complicated, too alive. So, as we begin this story, I want you to pay attention to the subtle details, the glances, the small gestures, the moments that seemed innocent but felt electric. I want you to imagine yourself in that room, caught between desire and hesitation, curiosity and restraint. The morning light did nothing to clear the haze in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about how our evening had unfolded, each moment replaying like a film I wasn't ready to watch. My stepson, Alex, had always been close in a casual, familiar way. We shared meals, laughed at the same jokes, and sometimes exchanged stories late into the night. But last night, something had shifted. There was a look in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, something tender and questioning, as if he was testing boundaries I hadn't even realized existed. I tried to make sense of it, forcing myself to recall the smaller details. The way he leaned closer while telling a story, his hand brushing mine accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally. That subtle tension that had been building between us for months suddenly became undeniable. I found myself wondering whether he had felt it too, whether he had been aware of the electricity in the air, or if it was just my imagination. Days before, our interactions had been innocent, full of light teasing and gentle care. He was 22, tall, and had this easy charm that drew people in without effort. I, in my early 40s, had always seen him as family, someone to guide and protect. Yet, the more I tried to define the relationship, the more complicated it became. There were moments when his presence alone would make my pulse quicken, a warmth spreading that I couldn't explain. I kept asking myself, was it simply familiarity, or was it something deeper, something that neither of us was prepared to name? The house itself seemed to reflect the unspoken tension. Every corner reminded me of last night, the living room where we laughed a little too long, the kitchen where our hands had brushed as we reached for the same mug, the hallway where I caught him staring in a way that made me freeze. I couldn't escape the feeling that something had changed, that the balance of our connection had subtly shifted, yet neither of us had spoken about it. I found myself thinking about him at odd moments, while pouring coffee, while doing laundry, even when I tried to distract myself with work. There was a magnetic pull, a silent question hanging between us, asking if we could acknowledge it or if we were both too afraid. I couldn't tell whether I wanted to give in to the curiosity or hold back, afraid of consequences and the fragile threads of trust we had built over time. And then there was the mystery of his own feelings. I kept trying to read him, to catch a hint in his smile, a flicker in his eyes, anything that would tell me he felt the same way. But Alex was careful, polite, almost teasing in the way he avoided certain looks, leaving me suspended in a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Every interaction felt like a delicate dance, one misstep threatening to reveal everything too soon. So here I am, still thinking about that night, still wondering how much of what I feel is real and how much is just imagination fueled by longing. The story isn't clear, and the tension hasn't eased. It's only grown heavier, more complicated, more impossible to ignore. Even as the days went by, the morning after that night haunted me in ways I couldn't shake. Every conversation with Alex felt layered with unspoken meaning. I started noticing the smallest things, how he lingered a moment longer by the doorway, how his voice softened when he talked to me, the way he seemed to find excuses to be near. At the same time, there were moments that made me doubt myself, moments when he would pull back, laugh it off, or act completely normal, leaving me unsure whether anything had really shifted. It wasn't just my feelings that were tangled. Alex seemed to carry his own internal conflict, the kind that made me wonder if he even understood what he wanted. Sometimes, he'd confide in me about small frustrations in life, work, friendships, even fleeting worries about love. Those moments drew me closer, a sense of intimacy that felt natural yet dangerous. I kept reminding myself that we had boundaries, that some feelings were better left unexplored, but every glance and subtle gesture pulled me in deeper, and I couldn't ignore it. The tension started affecting the way we interacted with others in the house too. Family dinners felt charged with a quiet energy, small smiles, and inside jokes that no one else noticed, yet I could feel the underlying current. I caught myself replaying his laughter, the way he tilted his head when he was curious about something, and I wondered if he noticed my attention or if I was imagining it. There was a strange duality to it, part of me thrilled by the closeness, part of me anxious about what it could mean if anyone knew how complicated our bond had become. And then there were the small, almost accidental moments that kept me on edge. A touch on the arm while reaching for the same book, a shared silence that lasted a little too long, a fleeting smile that hinted at feelings neither of us dared voice. Each time it happened, my heart skipped, but my mind raced with questions. Did he feel the same way I did? Was he aware of how much I noticed? Was it fair to let myself imagine possibilities that might never exist? At the same time, I began reflecting on my own emotions in ways I hadn't before. Was this longing truly about him, or was it about the excitement, the forbidden nature of the connection, the thrill of emotions I hadn't expected to feel? I found myself examining every interaction, every laugh, every glance, searching for patterns, searching for answers that weren't coming. And just when I thought I had a grasp on things, new complications arose. Friends and family would comment on our closeness, subtle observations that made me wonder whether I was being reckless by letting my mind wander. Alex himself seemed conflicted, sometimes joking to mask the intensity of his feelings, sometimes lingering in ways that left the air between us heavy with unsaid words. The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Every glance from Alex felt loaded, every word spoken between us carrying an unspoken weight. The tension had become almost unbearable, a constant undercurrent that made even ordinary moments feel charged with possibility. I found myself watching him more than I should, memorizing the curve of his smile, the way his eyes lingered on things I couldn't see, the subtle gestures that hinted at feelings neither of us had dared to name aloud. At the same time, he seemed more distant at odd moments, pulling back as if afraid to cross some invisible line. It was maddening how someone could feel so close yet so impossibly far. I started noticing patterns in his behavior, the way he hesitated before responding to me, the small pauses that left me wondering if he was thinking the same things I was. And every time I tried to act normal, the memories of that night flooded back, making it impossible to pretend nothing had changed. The house itself felt different now. Rooms that had once been ordinary became charged with tension, each encounter a silent test. The living room, the kitchen, even the staircase, every space seemed to hold the memory of glances and touches, and I couldn't move through them without feeling the pull of anticipation. I began imagining scenarios in my mind, wondering how close we could get, how much we could risk before something irreversible happened. But with every thought came fear, the nagging worry that crossing certain lines might destroy the fragile trust we had built. And yet, I couldn't deny the magnetism between us. There were nights when our eyes would meet, lingering too long to be accidental, and a shiver would run through me. There were conversations that skirted the edge of intimacy, moments when silence said more than words ever could. Every small gesture, the brush of a hand, the accidental touch, the shared laugh seemed amplified, magnifying the tension in ways that were thrilling and terrifying all at once. I knew I wasn't alone in this uncertainty. Alex's subtle glances and nervous smiles suggested he was struggling with his own feelings, unsure how far to let himself go. And that made everything more complicated, more impossible to ignore. Every moment felt like a crossroads, every interaction a test of whether desire would give way to caution, or whether we would finally acknowledge the electric connection that had been building between us for weeks. Now, as I think about what comes next, I can feel the tension tightening, like a storm gathering just out of sight. The questions hang in the air unanswered. Will we cross the line that both terrifies and excites us? How far can curiosity push us before the consequences become unavoidable? And most of all, what will happen when the next moment arrives, when the unspoken finally threatens to break through? Just when I thought the tension between Alex and me had reached its peak, something unexpected happened. That afternoon, I was sorting through some old family photos in the living room, trying to distract myself from the constant pull of his presence, when Alex walked in. He was holding a small envelope, and there was a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before, something serious, something that made my heart tighten instantly. "I found this," he said softly, handing it over. The way his fingers brushed mine made me shiver, but it wasn't just the touch. It was the weight of the moment, the intensity in his eyes that seemed to ask a question without words. I took the envelope, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. I didn't know what I would find inside, but I could feel it might change everything. As I opened it, my eyes widened. It was a letter, written in a careful, almost hesitant hand. The words hinted at secrets from his past, things he hadn't shared with anyone, things that revealed a side of him I had never seen. Part of me wanted to read every word immediately, but another part of me hesitated, afraid that knowing this might change how I felt about him forever. The room felt suddenly smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Alex shifted nervously. I didn't know how to tell you," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know if I should, but I couldn't keep it from you anymore." The vulnerability in his tone, the way he looked at me as if searching for approval, left me stunned. I wanted to comfort him, to reach out, but I also felt the familiar tension, the magnetic pull between us that made every interaction dangerous, exciting, and impossible to ignore. And yet, the twist didn't end there. Just as I was trying to process the letter, my phone buzzed with a message I wasn't expecting. It was from someone who knew Alex better than I did, someone who hinted at knowing more about his feelings toward me than I had ever guessed. My stomach sank. The message suggested that Alex might have been keeping more than just a personal secret, that there were emotions and intentions I hadn't fully understood. I looked at him, trying to read his expression, but he looked equally uncertain, as if he was torn between honesty and fear. The quiet between us was thick with unspoken possibilities. Could I trust him completely? Did he feel the same way I did, Or had I misread every small gesture, every lingering glance? My heart raced with questions, with the knowledge that our connection had suddenly grown more complicated, more charged, and infinitely more thrilling. Every instinct told me that this was a turning point. The story of our relationship was no longer just about tension and attraction. It was about secrets, trust, and choices that could change everything. I couldn't help but feel the stakes rising with every passing second, every word unsaid, every lingering look. The air between us had grown almost unbearable by the evening. Every glance, every movement carried the weight of everything unsaid. Alex stood across the room, the letters still clutched in my hand, and I realized that this was the moment where the tension we had been holding for weeks could no longer be contained. My heart raced, my mind spun, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if I was ready to face whatever came next. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I finally asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. He took a cautious step closer, the vulnerability in his eyes almost unbearable. "I was scared," he admitted, "scared of what it might mean, for us, for everything we've had all this time." The honesty in his words hit me like a jolt, and I could feel the connection between us finally breaking through the barriers we had built. I dropped the letter onto the table and closed the distance between us. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had faded, leaving just the two of us suspended in a fragile bubble of tension and anticipation. His hand brushed mine, not by accident this time, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a mixture of relief, fear, and desire. Every unspoken question, every lingering glance, every subtle touch over the past weeks seemed to converge in that single, electric moment. "You feel it too, don't you?" I whispered, barely daring to speak. Alex's eyes softened, and he nodded, the tiniest smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I've felt it for a while, more than I should," he admitted. The weight of our shared secret of emotions that had been simmering just beneath the surface finally found a release. The tension, the uncertainty, the hesitation, all of it transformed into something raw, real, and undeniable. Just as I thought we had reached the resolution we both longed for, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was another message from the same mysterious sender, this time revealing a piece of information neither Alex nor I had expected. Something about his past, something that could change everything about how I saw him, and maybe even about the future we were about to step into together. I looked at Alex, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or simply stay frozen in that moment. He saw the message too, and his expression shifted instantly from vulnerability to concern, and then to a quiet determination. Whatever this new revelation was, it had just made our story far more complicated, far more thrilling, and far more unpredictable than I could have imagined. And in that instant, I realized the truth. Nothing in life or love is ever simple, but sometimes the unexpected twists are what make it unforgettable. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: our connection, our story, had only just begun. Even after the shock of the unexpected message, a sense of clarity began to settle between Alex and me. We sat together in the living room, the weight of secrets and confessions gradually giving way to understanding. The letter, the messages, and the tension that had seemed impossible to navigate all became part of a story we now shared, a story of emotions that neither of us could deny. Alex reached for my hand again, and this time there was no hesitation. It was a quiet affirmation, a gesture that said more than words ever could. We didn't have all the answers, and the future remained uncertain, but in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was honesty, connection, and the willingness to face everything together. The fear that had gripped us for weeks slowly melted into something lighter, warmer, and more promising. We laughed softly, reminiscing about small moments that had seemed insignificant at the time but now felt monumental. The playful teasing, the shared glances, the accidental touches, all of it had led us here, to a place where tension transformed into trust, uncertainty into closeness. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that whatever came next, we would face it side by side. Of course, life is rarely without surprises. That last message reminded us both that there are layers to people and relationships that only unfold over time. But instead of fear, it brought excitement, a sense that our story was still being written, with chapters full of romance, intrigue, and unexpected moments. And in that, I realized that the thrill of connection is not just in the answers, but in the journey itself, the way we navigate uncertainty, desire, and trust. As the evening settled into quiet comfort, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Sometimes, love and connection are messy, confusing, and unpredictable. And yet, when you find someone who makes your heart race and challenges you in ways you didn't expect, the risk feels worth it. That night, Alex and I weren't just stepson and stepmother. We were two people learning to trust, to feel, and to embrace the complexity of our bond. So I leave you with this. Moments of tension and longing can be confusing, but they're also what make life and romance unforgettable. Would you take a risk if it meant discovering a connection that could change everything? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me, should there be a sequel to see what happens next? Summary of the story. The morning after that night with my stepson still plays in my mind is a romantic suspense story about unexpected emotions, unspoken attraction, and the complicated bonds that form between two people. It explores desire, curiosity, and trust while navigating emotional boundaries, secrets, and personal revelations. The story builds tension, develops layered characters, and leaves viewers reflecting on love, risk, and connection.